The room was quiet when my brother stood up. We were sitting around a long table in the lawyer's office, waiting for our mother's will to be read. My aunts were whispering to each other. My cousins stared at the floor. The air felt heavy in the kind of way it only does when money and grief share the same room. Then my brother cleared his throat. He looked straight at me. Before we start, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I think the family deserves to know something." The room fell silent. He pointed at me. This woman wasn't there for Mom. Not really. She barely visited. She definitely didn't help with the hard parts. A few heads slowly turned toward me. My chest tightened, but I didn't say anything. Then he delivered the sentence he had clearly rehearsed. "She doesn't deserve a single dollar from Mom's estate." For a moment, no one spoke. Some of my relatives looked uncomfortable. Others nodded slightly as if this confirmed something they had already believed. 6 years. 6 years of hospital bills, late-night pharmacy runs, and sitting beside my mother's bed while machines beeped in the dark. And this was the story my brother had chosen to tell. But before I could even respond, the lawyer quietly placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of me. He adjusted his glasses and said something that changed the entire room. "Your mother left this for you specifically." Every eye shifted from my brother to the envelope. And suddenly the truth was about to walk into a room that had been built entirely on lies. My name is Elena Carter. I'm 34 years old, and until recently I worked as a senior dental assistant in a small clinic on the west side of Rochester. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills, and for most of my adult life, stability was all I ever asked for. Growing up, my family always looked normal from the outside. My mother Margaret worked as a school librarian. She had the kind of quiet kindness that made people trust her instantly. My father passed away when I was in college, so for most of my adult life, it had just been the three of us: Mom, my older brother, Daniel, and me. Daniel was 4 years older than I was, and if you had asked anyone in our extended family about him, they would have described him the same way: charming, confident, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention. At family gatherings, Daniel told the best stories. He made people laugh. He remembered everyone's birthdays. To our aunts and uncles, he was the pride of the family, and I was the quiet one. It wasn't that my family treated me badly. Not exactly. There were no dramatic fights or cruel words growing up, but there was always a subtle difference in how things worked. When Daniel needed help with something, the entire family rallied around him. When I needed help, I was usually told something like, "You're strong, you'll figure it out." Over time, that small difference shaped everything. Daniel learned that people would step in and fix problems for him. I learned how to handle things alone. For years, that arrangement seemed harmless. We grew up, moved into our own lives, and only saw each other during holidays or the occasional birthday dinner. But everything changed the year my mother got sick. It started with what she thought was a persistent infection. Then there were doctor visits, tests, more tests, and finally the diagnosis that turned our quiet family life into something completely different. Chronic heart failure. The kind that doesn't improve with time. The kind that slowly reshapes every part of daily life: appointments, medications, emergency visits, sleepless nights. At first, Daniel promised he would help. He said all the right things. "We'll handle this together." But as the months turned into years, that promise began to fade. Because when my mother needed someone to sit beside her hospital bed at 2 in the morning, it was never Daniel who showed up. It was me. And for the next 6 years, my life slowly became organized around one simple fact. My mother needed someone, and somehow that someone was always me. If you had asked anyone in my family growing up, they would have told you my childhood was perfectly normal, and in many ways it was. There were birthday parties, school events, holiday dinners crowded around my grandmother's dining table. From the outside, nothing about our family looked unusual. But when you live inside a family, you begin to notice the small patterns that outsiders never see. Daniel was always the center of those patterns. He was the first grandchild, the first boy in the family. And for reasons I didn't fully understand back then, That seemed to make him special. When Daniel walked into a room, people immediately asked about his life. How's school going? Are you still playing basketball? Your teacher says you're doing great. When I walked into the same room, the questions were simpler. Did you bring the salad? I don't think anyone meant it cruelly. It was just the way things naturally unfolded. Daniel was loud, confident, and charming. He had stories to tell. He could make our uncles laugh with impressions and jokes. He had a way of pulling attention toward himself without even trying. I was the opposite. I liked quiet places, books, small routines. If there was a problem that needed solving, someone needed a ride, a bill needed paying, a form needed filling out, I was the one people quietly asked for help. It wasn't that Daniel never helped, but when things became complicated, people tended to look at me. My mother once said something that stayed with me for years. You and Daniel are just different, she told me while we were washing dishes together after Thanksgiving dinner. He shines in front of people. You're the one who keeps everything running behind the scenes. At the time, I took it as a compliment, but I didn't realize how much that difference would matter later. Because when my father died during my second year of college, the entire dynamic of our family shifted overnight. Daniel had already graduated by then. He had moved to another city and started working in marketing for a tech company. His life was busy, fast-moving, full of travel and networking events. I moved back home for a while to help my mother adjust. At first, it was supposed to be temporary, just a few months to help with paperwork, insurance claims, and the small, everyday tasks that suddenly felt overwhelming to her. But those few months slowly turned into a permanent role. If the sink broke, I called the plumber. If the mortgage paperwork needed reviewing, I handled it. If the car needed repairs, I took it to the mechanic. Daniel visited during holidays and family events. When he did, everyone was excited to see him. My aunts hugged him like he had just returned from some grand adventure, and every time he left, someone inevitably said the same thing. Your brother is going places. No one ever said anything like that about me. And for a long time, I didn't mind. Because back then, I believed something simple, that families didn't keep score. I was wrong. When my mother's heart began to fail, her life shrank to a series of appointments, medications, and countdowns until the next test. At first, everyone in the family promised to help. My aunts brought over casseroles. Daniel called often, saying he would come home as soon as he could. Cousins sent cards. But as the months turned into years, the help tapered off. The first year was a blur of learning how to decipher medical jargon, where to park at the hospital, which nurse would actually call you back after hours. Mom's cardiologist explained that her condition could be managed but not cured. He printed charts and handed us pamphlets outlining a strict regimen of medications and lifestyle changes. My job was flexible enough that I could take long lunch breaks to drive Mom to her appointments. Sometimes I would sit with her in waiting rooms filled with outdated magazines and the steady hiss of oxygen tanks. Mom would talk about anything but her health. The latest book she had read, a recipe she wanted to try when she felt better, memories of her childhood on her parents' farm. We laughed a lot during those visits. It was strange and comforting how humor could survive even in the fluorescent-lit halls of a hospital. We learned the nurses' names. We knew which specialist had a habit of being 30 minutes late. We developed a rhythm to the chaos. Daniel came home 3 times that first year. Each time he swept into the hospital room with flowers and his easy smile. He posted a photo with Mom on social media, captioning it with hashtags like #FamilyFirst and #Blessed. Each time he left, he hugged Mom tightly and whispered that he would be back soon. He always meant it when he said it. But work got busy. Life in another city was expensive. Travel wasn't always possible. The reasons were endless. By the second year, I had memorized the copay amounts for every medication Mom took. I could recite the side effects of her beta blockers and diuretics in my sleep. I kept a chart on the fridge listing every pill, every dosage, every time of day it needed to be taken. When Mom was too weak to stand, I bathed her. When she felt strong enough to leave the house, I drove her slowly around the neighborhood so she could see the spring blossoms, or the way the leaves turned in the fall. I remember one night in the third year when Mom's breathing became shallow and erratic. Her skin was cool and clammy. I called the 24-hour nurse line. They told me to bring her in immediately. I bundled her up, carried her to the car, and drove through the dark streets with my hazard lights flashing. In the emergency room, I held her hand and whispered stories from my childhood to distract her from the needles and monitors. Daniel called while we waited for test results. "I just landed in Chicago," he said. "Is it serious?" I told him what the doctor had said. He promised to call again in the morning. Mom was admitted for a week that time. I slept in a chair beside her bed, waking up every time a nurse came in to check her vitals. My back ached. My eyes burned. I drank coffee that tasted like paper cups and loneliness. When we went home, I paid the hospital bill. Daniel sent a bouquet. By the fourth year, my savings account was a shadow of what it had been. I had stopped going out with friends. I had learned to fix things in the house myself because calling a repairman was an expense we couldn't afford. I knew the exact distance between our house and every open pharmacy within a 20-mile radius, because sometimes Mom's medications ran out unexpectedly, and I had to drive to another town in the middle of the night. During holidays, family members praised Daniel for flying in for a few days. They told me how grateful they were that he could be there for Mom. They asked me if I was enjoying my time off from work, while I took my mother's purse from the car to the house. Time off. By the fifth year, I stopped correcting them. Mom's condition fluctuated. Some weeks she could cook dinner with me and laugh at her favorite sitcoms. Other weeks she couldn't lift her fork without her hands shaking. I learned to track her weight daily, to watch for signs of fluid retention. I learned to recognize the subtle change in her voice that meant she was exhausted, even if she insisted she was fine. Daniel's visits became less frequent. When he came, he insisted we all go out for dinner, even if Mom was too tired. He would take selfies with her, tilt his head just right, tell the waitress that we had to celebrate life. One night after Mom had gone to bed and we sat in the living room, Daniel asked how much I was spending on her care. "A lot," I said, my voice flat. He whistled. "We'll have to talk about that when the time comes," he said. I didn't know what he meant then. I do now. The sixth year was a series of hospital stays and small victories. Mom's heart grew weaker. Her world shrank further. She slept more. We watched old movies together, pausing them when she dozed off. I started to plan my days around her medication schedule. Every time a bill arrived, I paid it. Every time Mom apologized for being a burden, I told her she wasn't. Every time Daniel called, he promised he would send some money soon. He never did. And yet, even as my bank account dwindled, even as I canceled plans and turned down promotions at work, even as I watched my friends move on with their lives, I never considered stopping. Because that's what daughters do. Or so I thought. Kindness is a word people love to use when they talk about caregivers. "You're so kind," friends would say when they heard I was taking care of my mother full time. "It's wonderful what you're doing." A distant cousin commented on one of Daniel's photos of me pushing Mom's wheelchair through a park. She wrote it under his post, not mine. Kindness became a label I wore like an apron. It covered the stains, the tears, the exhaustion, the resentment. It made everything look neat and selfless. But there's a price to wearing that apron, and no one warned me about it. The first sign was subtle. It came on a chilly November afternoon, about 3 years into Mom's illness. I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting through piles of medical bills when my phone chimed. It was a message from my cousin Lisa. "Are you coming to the family reunion next weekend? We haven't seen you in forever." I stared at the text and felt a dull ache in my chest. I hadn't been to a family event in months, not because I didn't want to, but because Mom needed care every few hours. A reunion meant finding someone trustworthy to stay with her, arranging medication schedules, and hoping there wouldn't be an emergency while I was gone. I typed a reply and erased it, then typed another and erased that too. Eventually I sent, "I can't. Mom has a doctor's appointment." Lisa responded with a sad face emoji, and a comment about how Daniel had just confirmed he'd be there. A week later, photos from the reunion flooded my feed. There was Daniel, arms around our cousins, laughing into the camera. The caption read, "Family means everything." Someone tagged me and wrote, "We missed you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're doing well." As if my life had become an optional subplot. The second sign was louder. It was a Sunday morning in mid-February when Daniel called me. "Hey," he said, his voice bright. "Mom's feeling better, right? Because I just got invited to a work retreat in Aspen next month. It overlaps with her birthday, but they really want me there." I pressed the phone to my ear and closed my eyes. "What do you need from me?" I asked, knowing the answer. "Could you do something nice for Mom on her birthday?" he said. "Like, take her out somewhere special. Post a photo. I don't want people thinking I'm a bad son." I almost laughed. "Sure," I said. "I'll take care of it." Of course I would. Because that was what I always did. The final sign was a package. A small box arrived on our doorstep in April, the last year of Mom's life. Inside was a silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant, along with a note from Daniel that said, "For Mom. Love you both. I'll be home soon." Mom held the necklace in her hands and smiled. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "He has such good taste." She didn't mention the 2 overdue invoices sitting under the box. She didn't see the line items and the totals. She didn't see me calculating how long my savings would last. Kindness had become a currency that everyone else spent on my behalf. And the more I gave, the more invisible I became. 3 months before my mother died, a bank statement arrived in the mail that didn't make sense. It came in an unassuming white envelope addressed to Margaret Carter, or authorized representative. I had seen hundreds of envelopes like this over the past 6 years. Hospital bills, insurance updates, statements from the pharmacy. All of them the kind of mail you open with a sigh. This one was different. Inside was a 3-page document showing withdrawals from my mother's savings account. I scanned the columns expecting to see our usual transactions, medication payments, grocery runs, the occasional brunch outing when Mom felt well enough to leave the house. Instead, I saw a series of large transfers, each one neatly dated, each one labeled with the words "online transfer." The amounts weren't for medications or groceries, they were in the thousands, and they had been initiated over a 6-month period. At first, I thought the bank had made a mistake. My name was on the joint account because I handled all of Mom's bills. Daniel's name wasn't. That was an intentional decision years earlier when the account was created. Mom had said, "You're the one who takes care of these things." Why would there be transfers I didn't recognize? I called the bank. The customer service representative put me on hold, transferred me twice, and finally came back on the line with a polite voice and an unsettling answer. The transfers were authorized online using a linked device, she said. They were verified with a 2-factor code sent to the primary phone number on file. "What number do you have on file?" I asked, heart pounding. She read a number that was not mine and not my mother's either. It was Daniel's. I thanked her, hung up, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the statement. A sick, cold feeling took root in my stomach. I called Daniel. He didn't answer. For a moment I considered calling my mother and asking her directly, but I hesitated. Mom had been so tired recently, her voice weaker, her breath shorter. Burdening her with this would only add to her stress. So I did what I always did when I needed clarity. I gathered information. I visited the bank in person with Mom's medical power of attorney and asked to see the account activity. I requested copies of the authorization forms and the IP addresses associated with the logins. It took 2 visits, an appointment with the branch manager, and 1 nervous conversation with a bank employee who seemed more interested in keeping his job than helping me. But by the end of that week, I had everything I needed. The transfers had been made from Daniel's apartment. The device was his work laptop. The 2-factor codes were sent to his phone. The signatures on the electronic authorization forms were my mother's name typed out by someone who wasn't her. I remember sitting in my car in the bank's parking lot, holding the printed documents in my hands, hearing my own breath echo in the confined space. Outside, people walked by with coffee cups and grocery bags, oblivious to the fact that my family was unraveling in small digital transactions. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to call Daniel and demand answers to ask him how he could do this after everything. But instead, I took a deep breath, tucked the papers into my bag, and drove to my mother's house. When I walked in, Mom was sitting in her favorite chair by the window, a blanket draped over her knees. She smiled when she saw me. "How was the bank?" she asked, her voice soft. "It was fine," I lied. We spent the afternoon together. We watched a movie she loved. We ate soup. I helped her to bed early when she grew tired. I kissed her forehead and whispered goodnight. In the quiet of her darkened room, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Daniel yet. I would wait. Because for the first time in 6 years, I understood that kindness without boundaries wasn't just selfless, it was dangerous. And if Daniel could quietly drain my mother's account while pretending to be a devoted son, what else was he capable of when money was involved? So I collected evidence. I called a lawyer, I made copies of every document, and I waited for the day when the truth would matter most. That day came as fate would have it at my mother's will reading. When I entered the lawyer's office on the day of my mother's will reading, I felt like I was walking into a theater where everyone knew their lines except for me. The room was familiar in the way that all waiting rooms feel familiar: beige walls, framed certificates, a small table with neatly stacked magazines. The difference was the tension. It hung in the air like humidity, thick and clinging. My brother was there early. He shook hands with relatives as they arrived, smiling with practiced ease. He hugged Aunt Susan, patted our cousin Tom on the back, cracked a joke that made Uncle Gary laugh too loudly. He was the portrait of a dutiful son in mourning. I sat down in a chair near the window and said hello quietly when people greeted me. Some hugged me tightly. Others offered stiff, obligatory smiles. I could feel whispers brushing past me like insects. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Peterson with silver hair and a calm demeanor, entered the room carrying a leather-bound folder. He took his seat at the head of the table and flipped the folder open with the care of a surgeon preparing for an operation. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice gentle. "I know this is a difficult day. Your mother was a remarkable woman. She left clear instructions for how she wanted her estate handled." I glanced at Daniel. He was looking at me, his expression carefully blank. Before Mr. Peterson could continue, Daniel cleared his throat. "Mr. Peterson," he said, "before we start, I think it's important for the family to hear something." The lawyer frowned slightly but nodded. "Briefly, please," he said. Daniel stood. He placed his hands on the table, leaning forward like a politician addressing a committee. "I don't want there to be any confusion later," he began. "Mom always wanted things to be fair, and I think she would want us to be honest here." He glanced around the room, meeting each person's eyes before landing on me. "Elena didn't really take care of Mom," he said, letting the words hang in the air. "She wasn't around. She was busy. She didn't visit like I did. She didn't pay for things like I did." Every muscle in my body went rigid. My fingers dug into the armrests of my chair. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. "This is about Mom's wishes," Daniel continued. "And it wouldn't be right if someone who wasn't there tried to claim something they don't deserve." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Aunt Susan shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Uncle Gary whispered something to our cousin Tom. I kept my eyes on Mr. Peterson, who looked at Daniel with a mixture of surprise and disapproval. When Daniel finished, he sat back down. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Mr. Peterson took a breath. "Thank you, Daniel," he said, his tone neutral. "However, this is not the time or place for accusations. We are here to execute your mother's will, which is a legal document." He turned to me. "Elena, your mother asked that I hand you something before the reading." He reached into his folder and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in my mother's neat handwriting. The paper looked slightly worn, as if it had been handled carefully many times. He slid it across the table toward me. My hands shook slightly as I picked it up. The room seemed to shrink, the edges blurring. For a moment, all I could see was my mother's cursive letters on the front of the envelope. I broke the seal. Inside was a letter folded twice and several documents. I unfolded the letter first, my heart beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. My mother's words were simple and direct. Elena, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I couldn't leave without telling you the truth. I know you took care of me. I know everything you did. I know every night you slept in that hospital chair. I know every bill you paid. I know every moment you spent holding my hand while I was scared. I also know that Daniel took money from my savings without my permission. I didn't know at first. I thought I had forgotten transactions. Then I checked with the bank and learned about the transfers. I wanted to confront him, but I was tired. I didn't have the strength for a fight. I didn't want to lose the little time I had left with you over something so ugly. So I have left everything to you. This will upset many people. They will say it is unfair. They will say you don't deserve it. They will say many things to protect themselves from the truth. But I need you to know this: you were there when it mattered. You sacrificed so much. And I could never repay that. I hope this helps even a little. I hope you forgive me for not saying this sooner. Please live your life for yourself now. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for surviving. I love you. Mom. My throat closed. I could feel tears sting my eyes, but I willed them not to fall. I inhaled slowly and exhaled. I placed the letter on the table and looked up. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. Along with the letter, your mother included copies of the bank statements showing the unauthorized transfers, he said, tapping the stack of papers that remained in the envelope. She also included a new will signed and notarized by an independent witness that supersedes any previous versions. He looked at Daniel. Your mother has left her entire estate to Elena. The room erupted. Aunt Susan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Uncle Gary's chair scraped against the floor as he shifted in shock. Daniel's face went from confident to confused to a shade of red I had never seen before. That's ridiculous, he stammered. Mom would never do that. She told me we would split everything. Mr. Peterson was unmoved. I have here documentation and a video recording of your mother dated 3 months ago expressing her wishes, he said. It was signed by 2 witnesses and notarized. It is valid under the law. Daniel's eyes darted around the room, searching for support. He found none. He turned back to me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my brother's eyes. This isn't right, he whispered. You manipulated her. You made her do this. I held his gaze. No, I said softly. You did this, when you took her money and lied to everyone about it. He started to say something else, but his voice faltered. He sat down, his shoulders collapsing slightly. There was no applause, there were no cheers, just the quiet sound of paper being shuffled as Mr. Peterson continued reading the rest of the will. In that moment, justice didn't feel like the loud, triumphant thing I had imagined. It felt like a gentle exhale after holding my breath for years. I wasn't looking to punish Daniel. I wasn't looking to humiliate him. I was simply done being erased. The days after the will reading were strangely quiet. For most of my life, I had been defined by what my family needed from me. There was always a phone call to return a bill, to pay an appointment, to attend a crisis, to manage. Suddenly, there were none. My phone stayed silent. My inbox filled with automated messages from streaming services and pharmacy refill reminders. But there were no urgent texts from my brother, no passive-aggressive calls from relatives. It was as if by exposing the truth in that room I had stepped out of some invisible job description I hadn't realized I'd signed. Daniel didn't call me. He emailed Mr. Peterson's office twice that week, demanding to see the video recording of my mother's statement. He insisted there must be another will somewhere. He called Aunt Susan, cried on the phone to Uncle Gary, posted a long cryptic message on social media about betrayal and blood ties. But he didn't call me. He didn't need to. I knew what he thought. I had been there when he spoke the words in front of everyone. Aunt Susan texted once. "This has been hard for everyone," she wrote. "Your brother is devastated. Maybe you could talk to him." I stared at the message for a long time, then turned my phone off. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said. Daniel's devastation wasn't about losing our mother. It was about losing control. The legal process was swift. Mom had signed everything correctly, and the presence of a notary and witnesses meant there was little Daniel could do. The bank froze the accounts connected to my mother's estate. Mr. Peterson arranged for the deed to the house to be transferred into my name. The house felt different after that. Its rooms echoed in an unfamiliar way. I found myself walking softly as if not to wake sleeping memories. In my mother's bedroom, I found drawers filled with old photographs, handwritten letters, and small items she had kept from her childhood. I spent hours sorting through them, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling, always feeling an ache I couldn't quite name. Daniel didn't attend the estate settlement meeting. He sent a terse email through his attorney saying he wouldn't contest the will further, but that he wanted to be fairly compensated for the emotional labor he had provided over the years. Mr. Peterson raised an eyebrow when he read that phrase out loud, then filed the email away. 2 weeks later, Daniel moved out of his city apartment. Aunt Susan said he went to live with a friend. He posted photos from bars and restaurants, captioning them with phrases like, "New beginnings and real family is chosen." None of our relatives commented. A month after the will reading, a letter arrived from the attorney representing the estate. It contained a small check drawn from my mother's remaining liquid assets. Daniel had been given his legally mandated portion. Our state's intestate laws required it, though it was nothing close to what he'd expected. Mr. Peterson assured me that this was standard procedure and that it was final. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't want Daniel to suffer. I wanted distance. So I called a realtor. We walked through the house together, room by room, discussing the repairs needed to put it on the market. The realtor asked if I planned to stay in town. I heard myself say no before I had fully thought about it. Because somewhere between the hospital rooms and the lawyer's office, between my mother's gentle voice and my brother's public accusations, I had realized something I had never dared to imagine I could leave. I didn't owe anyone anything. I could choose a place where no one knew me as Margaret Carter's daughter or Daniel Carter's sister. I could wake up without the weight of other people's expectations pressing on my chest. I could decide where to hang my pictures and what to do with my evenings. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was in the strangest way a gift from my mother that had nothing to do with money. So I sold the house. I packed my mother's belongings carefully, keeping some things: her wedding ring, the necklace she wore on special occasions, the cookbook she had handwritten when she was young. I donated others. I moved into a small apartment in a different city with a window that overlooked a busy street. I bought secondhand furniture. I learned to enjoy the sound of my own footsteps in a place that was truly mine. In the weeks that followed, there were moments when the silence felt heavy, when guilt tried to creep in like a draft under a door. But each time it did, I opened my mother's letter and read her words again. I reminded myself that letting go was not betrayal, that boundaries are not coldness, that peace is not selfishness. The consequences of the will reading rippled through my family like a quiet storm. Some cousins unfollowed me on social media. A few relatives sent me messages asking if I would reconsider Daniel's portion. I told them to contact Mr. Peterson. I didn't hear back. Life went on. The world didn't collapse. The guilt lost its grip. And for the first time in years, the air I breathed felt like it belonged to me. When I think back on everything that happened those long nights in the hospital, the lawyer's office filled with tension, the envelope with my name on it, I'm left with a single thought that my mother wrote in her letter. Please live your life for yourself now. It took me 34 years to understand that boundaries are not a betrayal, that love doesn't mean tolerating exploitation, that being a good daughter doesn't mean sacrificing your soul. If you've ever been treated like a source of money instead of a person, if you've ever been cut out of a family photo but kept on the bill, If you've ever been made to feel selfish for wanting peace, you are not alone. Families are complicated. They can be loving and suffocating, supportive and manipulative all at once. Sometimes the people who shout the loudest about loyalty are the ones who break it quietly when no one is looking. My mother's last gift to me wasn't the house or the money. It was the permission to let go, the courage to say enough, and the realization that peace, true peace, is worth more than any inheritance. So ask yourself, what does family mean to you? How much of your life is really yours? And what would you do if the truth walked into the room today? If this story made you feel something, share it. Leave a comment, tell your own story, and remember you deserve a life that belongs to you.